This is one of a series of videos on Nebraska's system of classifying and applying standards to its highways, roads, and streets. This video introduces Nebraska's minimum design standards for county roads and municipal streets, identifies the required design criteria, and shows how the tables of criteria are set up for those design standards. First, some terminology and acronyms. NBCS is the Nebraska Board of Public Roads Classifications and Standards. It may also be called the Board of Public Roads or just the Board. NDOT is the Nebraska Department of Transportation. Standards refers to the NBCS standards including design, construction, maintenance, and relaxation of standards. MDS refers to the minimum design standards, which address only the design aspect of a work or project. Standards are often termed minimum, but realize there are maximums for superelevation and grade, and ranges for cross slopes. When we say minimum, sometimes it refers to all of those. NEB-REV-STAT refers to the Nebraska Revised Statutes. NAC is the Nebraska Administrative Code. These are regulations that have the force of law. The word highway in Nebraska law also refers to roads and streets. Highway means the entire width between the boundary limits of any street, road, avenue, boulevard, or way which is publicly maintained when any part is open to the use of the public for purposes of vehicular travel. 3R is short for Resurfacing, Restoration, and Rehabilitation. For more details, see the video dedicated to 3R. FC is Functional Classification. CFR is the Code of Federal Regulations. AASHTO is the acronym for the American Association of State Highway Transportation Officials. This video and the following videos provide more details on the minimum design standards. It is important to understand that state highway design standards are separate and distinct from county roads and municipal streets design standards. In Section 1, Subsection 2, pages 5 through 34, addresses state highway system design standards. Subsection 3, pages 35 through 86, addresses county roads and municipal streets design standards, which is the focus of this video. A standard can be defined as a level of quality or attainment, or an ideal or basis in terms of which something can be evaluated or judged. The NBCS expresses the level, ideal, or basis as attributes, mostly as key criteria, and sets values for each criteria depending on the general category, urban or rural, functional classification, and other factors. As it would be impractical to set standards for every design element or every situation that can be encountered, the NBCS selected only certain key criteria to include in the minimum design standards. These criteria have been shown to affect safe and efficient operation of highways, roads, and streets. The minimum design standards can be found online in two places: the Secretary of State's website under Rules and Regulations. It may be easiest to browse rules and regulations by agency. The agency to select is Transportation. Once you are in the Transportation list, select Title 428. The minimum design standards are in Chapter 2 of Title 428. Another place to find NBCS standards is the Nebraska DOT's website using either of the two web links shown at the bottom of the screen. The video following this one has more detailed information on the NBCS minimum design standards. Minimum design standards try to achieve safer designs, meet driver expectations, and improve the reliability of the highway, road, and street network. Standards are a primary means of achieving a high-quality product, although there is a lot more to designing a road or street than just meeting minimum standards. Standards are a way of benchmarking system-wide needs. And standards are required by authority by the federal government, the Nebraska legislature, and possibly local ordinances and laws as well. The NBCS is responsible, via State Statute 39-2113, for developing minimum design standards for each functional classification. The overall goal as expressed in the statute is assuring that each segment on the public system of highways, roads, and streets will satisfactorily meet the requirements of the area it serves and the traffic patterns and volumes which it may reasonably be expected to bear. Design standards for highways, roads, and streets apply to works and projects that are to be done. When a standard becomes effective through the rulemaking process, it is not the intention of the NBCS that all highways, roads, and streets immediately meet those standards. Rather, the design standards must be met whenever work more than maintenance is done. There are three main elements that make up the minimum design standards: definitions, notes, and tables. The rule includes 39 definitions on pages 37 through 46. The NBCS wanted to define the types of work to distinguish 3R work from reconstructed work and maintenance work and other terms that are used throughout the standards in order to be clear and to avoid confusion. The rule includes 22 notes on pages 47 through 54 and 15 tables which have required criteria and values associated with each criterion. Definitions and notes are addressed in another video in this series. County roads and municipal streets design standards include 13 criteria: design speed, lane width, shoulder width, horizontal radius, super elevation, vertical alignment, maximum grade, stopping sight distance, cross slope, vertical clearance, clear bridge width, structural capacity, horizontal clear zone. Definitions for each criterion are found on pages 45 and 46 of the rule. The first 12 criteria may be referred to as controlling criteria. This will be discussed on the next screen. A resource for background information on design criteria is FHWA's publication Mitigation Strategies for Design Exceptions, July of 2007. This publication identifies 13 design criteria as having substantial importance for the safe and efficient operation of highways, roads, and streets. These are called controlling criteria. In May of 2016, the Federal Highway Administration reduced this to 10 controlling criteria. This would have consequences only on federal aid projects. For further questions, discuss this with NDOT's local project section as needed. Highway design criteria have been established through years of practice and research and form the basis by which roadway designers achieve a balanced design. The criteria are intended to deliver an acceptable, generally cost-effective level of performance in terms of traffic operations, safety, maintainability, and constructability. The criteria are updated and refined as research and experience increase knowledge in the field of highway engineering, traffic operations, and safety. The next screens introduce the tables in the County Road and Municipal Street System Minimum Design Standards. There are 15 tables: urban areas, rural areas, scenic recreation, low water stream crossings and fords, minimum maintenance roads, and remote residential roads. In the rule, they are in the order shown on the screen, starting on page 55, with the last table, remote residential roads, on page 86. If you are wondering why there are 4 tables each for urban, rural, and scenic recreation, County Road and Municipal Street design standards are keyed off of the National Functional Classification. The AASHTO Green Book and other industry references are generally organized the same way. Recall from the video on the basics of functional classification that the National Highway System has 7 functional classifications. They are the 4 listed on this slide plus 3 higher classifications: other principal arterials, other freeways and expressways, and interstate. Those higher classifications, except for some of the other principal arterials, are on the State Highway System. Subsection 2 of the Minimum Design Standards, pages 5 through 34, apply to those classifications. This video series does not address subsection 2. County roads and municipal streets generally have one of the 4 national functional classifications shown on this screen. Remember also from the video on functional classification basics that scenic recreation is the only classification that goes with another classification. Thus, any rural road with one of the classifications shown on this screen can also have the dual classification of scenic recreation. Because there are 4 functional classifications covered in the minimum design standards for county roads and municipal streets, and each functional classification has its own set of design standards, there are 4 tables for urban areas, 4 for rural areas, and 4 for scenic recreation. Refer to pages 55 through 78. This screen shows the format of the 12 tables for municipal, rural, and scenic recreation, pages 55 through 78. Some of the characteristics of these tables are as follows. Each is 2 pages. Each has its own part letter. The table on the slide is Part C. It is the first table in subsection 3. The tables following are D, E, F, and on up to N on pages 77 to 78. Each table is identified at the top. Since the 12 tables have criteria and values for new and reconstructed work and 3R work, and all of them apply to county road and municipal street systems, the key identifier at the top is, in this example, urban areas. The national functional classification is identified above the table. The state functional classification is also identified above the table. As discussed in the functional classification basics video, there is not always a one-to-one correlation between the national functional classification system and the state functional classification system. Therefore, in these 12 tables, all of the state functional classifications that could apply are listed. As for the table itself, the area is always identified. Urban areas for the urban tables, and rural areas for the rural and scenic recreation tables. Roads classified as scenic recreation are located in rural areas. Notes that apply are called out in parentheses throughout each table. Notes 1, 2, 3, 4, and 7 in parentheses at the top of the table just after the words urban areas apply to the entire table shown on the screen. Note 6, positioned at the head of the 3R column, applies to all of the 3R criteria. Note 8, positioned next to design speed, applies only to the design speed criterion for both new and reconstructed and 3R criteria. Note 9 works the same way, only for lane width. The left column lists the criteria. The middle column has values for those criteria for new and reconstructed work. The right column has values for those criteria for 3R work. That is the general layout of the first 12 tables in the county roads and municipal streets minimum design standards. The other 3 tables begin on page 79 and end on page 86. When you look at these, you will realize that they are a different format than the preceding 12 tables. There are not as many design criteria, and the presence of signage requirements make them very different from the other tables. Low water stream crossings and fords is the only table that is not a functional classification. However, it needs its own table in order to establish minimum standards requirements. Minimum maintenance and remote residential are 2 of the optional state functional classifications. If you have a road with either of these classifications, the applicable minimum standards would be either table P or Q, depending on if the road is classified as minimum maintenance or remote residential. On the national system, the same road is likely to have a functional classification of local, but the minimum standards in Table J on pages 69 to 70 would not apply to that road. However, for that same road, if the county chooses to meet or exceed the minimum design standards for National Functional Classification Local, Table 3J on pages 69 to 70, a relaxation of standards request is not required. This does not apply, however, to low water stream crossings or fords. State law requires minimum maintenance county roads to provide for a level of minimum maintenance sufficient to serve farm machinery and the occasional or intermittent use by passenger and commercial vehicles, and signs at entry points and regular intervals to adequately warn drivers of the lower level of maintenance effort relative to other public roads. It also allows the county to remove a defective bridge, culvert, or structure, and, if appropriate, not have to replace it. State law requires remote residential county roads to have a level of maintenance sufficient to provide access to remote residences, farms, and ranches by passenger and commercial vehicles, to allow for one-lane traffic as long as there is adequate sight distance and signs that warn the traveling public that it is a one-lane road. This screen and the next present important design considerations that county roads and municipal streets design standards do not address. Lateral offset to obstruction, a distance from the edge of the traveled way to a vertical roadside element, such as trees, utility poles, walls, barriers, sign or signal supports, and curbs. Design flood. Your county or municipality probably has a policy dealing with the appropriate level of flooding for various situations or areas. Q is a letter used to denote a design flood, and you will see it on plans expressed as Q2 for a 2-year flood, Q10 for a 10-year flood, etc. Quite often, it is best to have an engineer licensed in Nebraska size your culverts and bridges. Barrier crashworthiness and pavement service life are other important criteria not covered in design standards. The minimum design standards do not include several other requirements: intersections and roundabouts, access management, alleys and driveways, lighting, signing, and marking, medians, number of lanes, surfacing type, and the Americans with Disabilities Act. None of these are covered in this video series, with the exception of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And signing requirements for minimum maintenance roads, remote residential roads, and low water stream crossings and fords. Segments of a work or project could have different work scopes. The hypothetical project on this screen, starting at the bottom, shows a maintenance overlay. At the top is a mill and overlay 3R scope of work, and in the middle is a culvert replacement, a new and reconstructed type of work. This is generally acceptable. See page 40 of the minimum design standards. It is not allowable to mix and match different standards within a work segment, or to apply urban standards on one side of the road and rural standards on the other side of the road. This final segment is a short review of what was discussed in this video with questions. When it comes time to answering a review question, you have the option of pausing the video before the answer is given. Question 1. Notes from the State Highway System Design Standards, subsection 2, may also be used for county roads and municipal streets, subsection 3. True or false? The answer is false. Subsection 2, the State Highway Design Standards, are separate from subsection 3, the County Roads and Municipal Streets Design Standards. The only connection is that county roads and municipal streets with a national functional classification of other principal arterial must use state highway design standards. Other than that, nothing from either subsection applies to the other. Question 2. All county roads and municipal streets are not required to be brought up to current design standards within the 6-year plan period. True or false? The answer is true. State Statute 39-2101 originally envisioned all roads and streets being brought up to new and reconstructed standards over a 20-year period. That was in 1969. The same statute also recognized that funding is not always available. Question 3. What is the level of design flood required by the NBCS minimum design standards for a city street classified as local? True or false? The answer is there is no minimum design flood requirement in the NBCS minimum design standards. This concludes the minimum design standards, its main elements, and controlling criteria. This is one of the series of videos on Nebraska's system of classifying and applying standards to its highways, roads, and streets. This video introduced Nebraska's minimum design standards for county roads and municipal streets, identified the required design criteria, and showed how the tables of criteria are set up for those design standards.